After being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, I didn't know how to tell my children the devastating news. My neurologist's report had been sitting on the coffee table for 4 days, untouched. Not one of them asked what those medical papers were, even though they walked past them countless times. It wasn't until I won the $37 million lottery jackpot that my phone suddenly wouldn't stop ringing. The morning I discovered my lottery win coincided with my worst MS flare-up yet. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the ticket to check. The numbers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 63 years of stretching every dollar, of sacrificing everything for my family, fate had decided to bless me with millions right when my body was beginning to fail me. I still remember the exact moment I realized I'd won. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. The morning news played in the background as I sipped my tea, the same chamomile I'd been drinking for decades. The lottery numbers scrolled across the bottom of the screen. I glanced down at my ticket, the one I'd bought on a whim after my last doctor's appointment. The numbers matched. All of them. For a full minute, I couldn't breathe. I checked and rechecked, convinced I was hallucinating. A new symptom, perhaps, to add to the growing list the MS had gifted me. But the numbers remained the same. 7, 16, 24, 33, 42, 51. And the Powerball, 9. My late husband Alan's birthday. The first thing I did wasn't call my children. It wasn't even to celebrate. I simply sat there, a strange emptiness washing over me. After all, who would I share this news with? 2 months earlier, when I'd called a family meeting to explain the diagnosis, my son Randy had checked his watch every 5 minutes. My daughter Crystal had been more concerned about who would watch her children now that I couldn't be relied upon. My youngest Irene hadn't even bothered to show up. I tucked the winning ticket into my diary and closed it. Then I picked up my MS medication from the kitchen counter, the pills I'd been paying for out of pocket since my insurance denied coverage. Each bottle cost nearly $2,000, eating away at my modest retirement savings month after month. I swallowed the day's dose and gazed around at my small apartment. The place was clean but sparse. After Alan died 5 years ago, I'd downsized to this one-bedroom unit to save money. The children had quickly divided up our family home's contents, leaving me with just the basics. Crystal took my antique tea set, the one my grandmother had, brought from Europe. Randy claimed Alan's vintage record collection that I'd carefully preserved for decades. Irene wanted nothing except the insurance money, which she said was fair since she had student loans. Now I sat at my small kitchen table, the winning lottery ticket safely hidden away, and I thought about how my life was about to change, not just financially, but fundamentally. Because for the first time in over 40 years, I had the power to say no. I'm not naive. I grew up in the era when women were expected to be the emotional backbone of the family. When Alan and I married in 1982, I was 20, bright-eyed, and ambitious. I'd just finished my associate's degree in library science and had dreams of working my way up to head librarian someday. Alan encouraged me at first. He was progressive for his time, he said. But when Crystal arrived a year later, followed by Randy 18 months after that, the tune changed. The children need their mother, he'd say, not unkindly. There's no job more important than raising our kids. And I believed him. I put my career aside, promising myself I'd return once they started school. But then Irene surprised us when I was 32, and somehow the years slipped away. I became the perpetual support system. I was the one who drove to soccer practices and violin lessons, who stayed up all night helping with science fair projects, who cooked holiday meals for 20 relatives without complaint. I was the emergency contact, the homework checker, the birthday rememberer, the keeper of family traditions. Through it all, I kept a small piece of my identity tucked away. 2 evenings a week, I volunteered at our local library, shelving books, and helping with children's reading programs. It wasn't paid work, but it kept me connected to my original passion. Alan called it my little hobby, with an indulgent smile, as if it were as inconsequential as collecting stamps or knitting. When the kids grew up and had children of their own, I naturally became the default babysitter. "Mom, you're not doing anything else," Crystal would say as she dropped off 5-year-old Emily and 3-year-old Susan at my apartment 3 times a week. Randy's twins, Andre and Douglas, spent most weekends with me while he and his wife Leah went on necessary couples retreats to save their struggling marriage. I never complained. I loved my grandchildren fiercely, and I was grateful for their company, especially after Alan died. They filled my quiet apartment with noise and chaos and sticky handprints on the furniture. I taught them to bake my special, cinnamon rolls, read them the same bedtime stories I'd read to their parents, kissed scraped knees and whispered "I love you" into soft hair that smelled of baby shampoo. But then came the first symptoms. The fatigue that no amount of sleep could touch, the strange tingling in my fingers that made it difficult to button my cardigan, the occasional blurring of vision that I initially blamed on needing new reading glasses. The diagnosis was devastating. Multiple sclerosis, a chronic progressive disease with no cure. The neurologist explained it gently. My immune system was attacking the protective covering of my nerves. Symptoms would come and go, but over time, they would likely worsen. I might need mobility aids, experience cognitive changes, require assistance with daily tasks. I sat in that sterile office, nodding as the doctor spoke, thinking not of myself but of my family. Who would watch the grandchildren now? Who would host Thanksgiving dinner? Who would remember Crystal's preference for chocolate cake with vanilla, frosting on her birthday? The first person I called was Randy. He was the practical one, the one who worked in finance and understood insurance and medical terminology. "Mom, I'm heading into a meeting," he said, his voice distracted. "Can I call you later? It's not urgent, is it?" I hesitated, then said, "No, it can wait," and hung up. Next, I tried Crystal. She answered on the 5th ring, the sound of her children, arguing in the background. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something," she snapped. "Emily spilled juice all over the new couch, and I have a presentation tomorrow that I haven't started. Can we talk this weekend?" I didn't bother calling Irene. My youngest rarely answered my calls these days, preferring to communicate through occasional text messages, usually when she needed something. So I went home alone, the diagnosis heavy in my pocket. I placed the neurologist's report on the coffee table, where anyone could see it. Where my children would notice it when they came to drop off the grandkids or borrow money, or ask me to dog sit. 4 days it sat there. 4 days during which Randy came by to pick up the twins' forgotten backpacks. 4 days during which Crystal called to ask if I could take the girls early on Friday because she had a hair appointment. 4 days during which Irene texted to see if I could lend her money for car repairs. Not one of them noticed the report. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to ask. On the 5th day, when the numbness in my right leg made it impossible to stand for longer than a few minutes, I finally told them. I called another family meeting, ordered pizza since I couldn't cook, and waited for them to arrive. Randy was 20 minutes late. Crystal brought the children even though I'd asked for an adults-only conversation. Irene showed up only after I texted that I had the cash she needed. When I finally told them, the reaction was worse than I'd feared. Not because they were devastated by the news, but because they immediately jumped to what it meant for them. "What?" "About the kids," Crystal demanded. "I can't afford daycare 5 days a week." "Mom, please tell me you have long-term care insurance," Randy said, already calculating costs on his phone. Irene just looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her bracelets. "So, how bad is it going to get? Will you need to move in with one of us or something?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, after they'd left, Randy with a stack of medical brochures he promised to look over when he had time, Crystal with a calendar to figure out new childcare arrangements, and Irene with the cash for her car plus extra, she said, she needed for groceries. I sat alone in my quiet apartment. The pizza boxes were still on the table. None of them had offered to clean up or even asked how I was feeling. Not one had hugged me or said, "It's going to be okay, Mom. We're here for you." That was the moment something broke inside me. A lifetime of putting everyone else first, of being available whenever they needed me but somehow invisible when I needed them. A lifetime of being taken for granted. I picked up the lottery ticket I'd purchased that morning, a small indulgence I allowed myself once a month. I looked at the random numbers I'd selected and thought, what if? Little did I know that 2 weeks later, that what if would become 37 million reasons for my children to suddenly remember they had a mother. For the first week after winning the lottery, I told no one. I kept the ticket locked in a small fireproof safe I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. I continued taking my medication, continued declining babysitting requests with vague excuses about not feeling well, continued living my quiet, unassuming life. It wasn't that I was unsure about claiming the prize. I just needed time to think, to plan, to savor the delicious secret knowledge that everything was about to change. During that week, Crystal called me 6 times. Each call followed the same pattern, a brief, distracted, "How are you feeling?" followed immediately by, "I was wondering if you could watch the girls on Thursday?" Or, "Do you think you could make those cupcakes Emily loves for her school bake sale?" Each time, I politely declined. "I'm sorry, but my leg is bothering me today. I'm afraid I can't stand long enough to bake." Simple, honest statements that were met with thinly veiled frustration. "Mom, you can sit while you watch them, can't you?" Crystal would sigh, exasperated. "It's not like they need you to run around, chasing them." Randy was more practical in his approach. He stopped by twice, bringing takeout food that I hadn't asked for and paperwork for me to sign. "I've been researching MS support groups," he said, setting a folder on my coffee table. "And I've drafted a budget for your care. Based on your current savings and Social Security, we might need to consider selling your condo if things get worse." I nodded, flipping through the documents. He'd already calculated the value of my home, projected my medical expenses, and listed several assisted living facilities with their associated costs. "I'm not ready for assisted living," I said quietly. Randy patted my hand. "Of course not, Mom. This is just preliminary planning. But we need to be realistic. Your condition isn't going to improve." Irene, true to form, didn't visit at all. She sent a text message 3 days after the family meeting. "Thinking of you, Mom. Let me know if you need anything." Then, 2 hours later. "Also, can I borrow your good suitcase? Going to Miami with friends next weekend." This was the status quo I'd lived with for years. 3 adult children who saw me primarily as a resource, childcare provider, ATM, emotional support system. The MS diagnosis hadn't changed that dynamic. It had only highlighted it. By the 10th day after my win, I'd made my decision. I contacted a lawyer recommended by an old friend from my library volunteering days. Amelia was a retired judge who had always treated me with genuine warmth during our book club meetings. When I explained my situation, she didn't hesitate. "I know exactly who you should talk to," she said. "My former clerk, Douglas Parker. He specializes in estate planning and financial privacy, smart as a whip and trustworthy." I met with Douglas the following day. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a careful way of speaking that made me feel heard. "Before we discuss the lottery," he said, "let's talk about what you want your life to look like moving forward. With or without the money." No one had asked me that question in decades. What did I want? Not what my family needed from me, not what was expected of me, but what I wanted for myself. I want peace, I said finally. I want to manage my MS with the best medical care available. I want to travel while I still can. I want to read all the books I've been meaning to read. And mostly, I want to be treated with respect. Douglas nodded, making notes. And your children? What role do you want them to play in your new life? I thought about Crystal's entitled demands, Randy's cold calculations, Irene's perpetual distance. They're adults with their own lives, I said. I love them, and I love my grandchildren, but I'm done organizing my existence around their needs. I'm not an endless resource to be tapped until I'm empty. That's very clear, Douglas said. Now, about the lottery winnings. If privacy is important to you, we have options. He explained that in our state, lottery winners could claim their prize through a trust or LLC, maintaining their anonymity. He recommended setting up a series of legal structures to protect my identity and my assets. The media attention for a win this size will be significant, he warned. If you claim it personally, every distant relative and old acquaintance will know about it, and given your health condition, you might become a target for scams or exploitation. I pictured my children's faces when they discovered my windfall. How quickly their attitudes would change, how suddenly they would become concerned, attentive, loving. I want complete privacy, I told him. I don't want anyone to know the money is mine unless I choose to tell them. Douglas helped me establish the New Chapter Trust, named innocuously enough to raise no suspicions. He arranged for the trust to claim the lottery prize and worked with a financial advisor to create a comprehensive investment plan. Together, they ensured that even after taxes, I would have more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, with plenty left over for whatever legacy I chose to leave behind. The day the trust claimed the prize, local news reported that a lottery winner had come forward but chosen to remain anonymous. I watched the report on my television, sipping chamomile tea, feeling a strange sense of power I'd never experienced before. That evening, my phone rang. It was Randy. Mom, did you hear about the lottery winner? 37 million. Can you imagine? I made a non-committal sound. The financial advisor at my firm thinks it might be someone local, he continued. Everyone's talking about it. Anyway, I was calling to check if you've looked at those assisted living brochures I left. We should really start thinking about next steps. Actually, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was, I've been thinking about taking a trip. There was a pause. A trip? Mom, I don't think that's a good idea with your condition. What if you have a flare-up in some strange place? Who would help you? I'll manage, I said. I've found a travel agency that specializes in accommodations for people with mobility issues. But what about the expense? You can't afford to waste money on travel right now. I smiled to myself. Don't worry about the money, Randy. I've got it covered. Mom, be serious. You need to be practical about your future. Let me come over tomorrow and we can go through the numbers again. No, I said, the word feeling foreign but satisfying on my tongue. I have an appointment tomorrow. We can talk when I get back. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment. The old me would have felt guilty for asserting myself, for refusing his help, for making plans without consulting my children. But that woman was fading away, replaced by someone new, someone with options. That night, I began researching luxury resorts with medical facilities nearby. I thought of the Mediterranean, of clear blue waters and ancient cities I'd only seen in books. I thought of renting a villa with a view of the ocean, of hiring a private nurse if needed, of museums and concerts and fine restaurants. For the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep dreaming not about my children's futures, but about my own. My appointment the next day wasn't medical. It was with a real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Susan who specialized in luxury properties. I'd found her through Douglas, who seem to have connections everywhere. I understand you're looking for something with specific accessibility features, Susan said as she drove me to the first property. But still elegant. Yes, I replied. My condition may progress, but I don't want to live in a place that feels like a hospital. The first condo she showed me took my breath away. Located on the top floor of a renovated historic building downtown, it had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, wide doorways that could accommodate a wheelchair if needed, a state-of-the-art kitchen with counters at various heights, and a master bathroom with a zero-entry shower. The building has 24-hour concierge service, Susan explained, and there's a car service available for residents. The hospital with the best neurology department in the state is less than 10 minutes away. I walked slowly through the rooms, trailing my fingers along the marble countertops, testing the firmness of the custom mattress, imagining myself living here. It was more space than I needed, 3 bedrooms when I only required 1, but I thought of having a dedicated library room, something I'd always dreamed of. It's perfect, I said, surprised at the certainty in my voice. Susan smiled. Would you like to make an offer? The asking price was nearly 4 times what my current apartment was worth. Before the lottery, I wouldn't have even allowed myself to look at the listing. Now, I simply nodded. I'll need it furnished, I added. I'm not bringing much from my old place. By the time I returned to my apartment that evening, Susan had called to tell me the offer had been accepted. I would be able to move in within 3 weeks. The thought both exhilarated and terrified me. My phone had 7 missed calls, 3 from Crystal, 2 from Randy, and surprisingly, 2 from Irene. I listened to the voicemails as I made myself dinner. Mom, I really need you to take the girls. Tomorrow, Crystal said, her voice tight with frustration. My sitter canceled, and I have that big presentation. I'll drop them off at 8. Randy's message was more measured but equally presumptuous. Mom, I've scheduled a tour at Sunny Pines Assisted Living for next Tuesday at 10 a.m. I'll pick you up at 9:30. They have a waiting list, so we need to get you on it now, before your ID condition deteriorates further. Irene's messages surprised me the most. Hey Mom, just checking in. So I've been thinking about what you said about your condition, and I was wondering if you've updated your will recently. Not trying to be morbid or anything, just, being practical. The second message came an hour later. Also, can I borrow $800? My car needs new brakes, and I'm a little short this month. I set my phone down beside my plate, a wave of weariness washing over me. They still didn't get it. None of them had asked how I was feeling or offered help. Just demands, expectations, and now, with my diagnosis, apparently a renewed interest in my will. I didn't call any of them back that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and booked a first-class ticket to Venice for the week after my move. If my children wanted to visit me at an assisted living facility, they could do so while I was floating down the Grand Canal. The pressure intensified the next morning when Crystal showed up at 8 a.m. sharp, Emily and Susan in tow, backpacks and lunch, boxes in hand. I can't stay, she said, already backing toward the door as the girls ran into my living room. I'll pick them up around 6, maybe 7 if the client wants to go for drinks after. She paused, finally looking at me directly. You look tired, Mom. You should sit down more. Before I could respond, she was gone, the door closing behind her. I turned to my granddaughters, who were already fighting over the TV remote. I loved these little girls with all my heart, but today, the thought of 9 hours of childcare while managing increasing numbness in my right leg filled me with dread. Girls, I said gently, I need to tell you something. Grandma isn't feeling well today. Emily, the older one, looked up with concern. Are you sick, Nana? Yes, sweetheart. I have something called MS. It means sometimes my body doesn't work quite right. Today, my leg is very tired. Susan, always the sensitive one, immediately came over and patted my hand. We can be quiet today. We can read books. My heart swelled with love for them. Unlike their mother, they responded to my needs with immediate compassion. "That's very sweet," I said. "But I think we need to call your mom. I can't watch you today." Emily's eyes widened. "But Mom said she has a big, important meeting." "I know," I said, reaching for my phone. "But Grandma needs to rest." The conversation with Crystal was brief and tense. "Mom, you can't do this to me," she hissed. "You know how important this presentation is." "I'm sorry, Crystal, but I told you yesterday I wasn't feeling well. You didn't ask, you just assumed." "Fine," she snapped. "I'll call Leah. Maybe she can take them." An hour later, Randy's wife arrived to collect the girls. Unlike my daughter, Leah took one look at me and frowned with concern. "You really don't look well," she said quietly, away from the children's ears. "Is there anything you need? Should I call Randy?" Her kindness, so unexpected, nearly brought me to tears. "No, thank you. I just need to rest." After they left, I sat in the sudden silence of my apartment, feeling simultaneously guilty and liberated. For the first time in years, I had prioritized my own well-being over my children's convenience. My phone rang again at noon. It was Randy. "Mom, what the hell?" he began without preamble. "Crystal had to bail on her presentation because you suddenly decided you couldn't handle the kids? She could lose this account." I took a slow breath. "Randy, I have MS. Today is a bad day. I told Crystal I wasn't feeling well yesterday, but she brought the girls anyway." "You've always watched them before, even when you were tired," he countered. "This is exactly why we need to look at assisted living options. You're becoming unreliable." The word stung. Unreliable. After decades of unwavering support, one instance of setting a boundary had earned me this label. "I'm not going to Sunny Pines on Tuesday," I said quietly. "What? Why not?" "Because I'm not ready for assisted living, Randy. I'm still perfectly capable of living independently." He made a frustrated sound. "Mom, be reasonable. Your condition is only going to get worse. We need to plan ahead." "I have plans," I said. "Just not the ones you're making for me." "What's that supposed to mean?" I hesitated, then decided to give him a small glimpse of my new reality. "It means I'm moving. I've bought a new condo downtown." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, "You what? How? Mom, you can't afford a condo downtown. Those places cost a fortune. What are you talking about?" "I've made some investments," I said vaguely. "My finances are in order." "What investments? Mom, have you been scammed? Did someone talk you into something? You need to tell me right now what's going on." The panic in his voice might have been touching if it hadn't been so clearly centered on his concerns rather than mine. He wasn't worried I'd been taken advantage of. He was worried there might not be any money left for him to manage. "I need to go, Randy. I'm tired." "No, Mom, we need to talk about—" I hung up. Then I turned off my phone completely. The silence was golden. The 3 weeks before my move passed in a blur of medical appointments, packing, and increasingly frantic attempts by my children to regain control over my life. I maintained a delicate balance, revealing enough to justify my decisions without disclosing the full extent of my financial transformation. Randy was the most persistent. After our phone call about the condo, he showed up at my door the very next morning, armed with printouts of real estate listings. "Mom, I found your building online," he said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. "These units start at $1.2 million. There's no way you can afford this." I continued packing books into a small box, carefully wrapping the special editions I'd collected over the years. "I told you, I've made some good investments." "What investments?" His voice rose with frustration. "Mom, I'm a financial advisor. I know exactly what your portfolio looks like, or at least I thought I did. You have your retirement account, your Social Security. and a small inheritance from Dad. None of that adds up to downtown condo money. I taped the box shut and labeled it library in neat block letters. There are some things you don't know about my finances, Randy. His face flushed. Are you serious right now? I've been managing your money for years. Every account, every penny. I've tracked it all to make sure you'd be secure in retirement. You've been monitoring the accounts you know about, I corrected gently. Not everything. The implication that I'd kept financial secrets from him, my son, the financial expert, seemed to shake him more than anything else. He sat down heavily at the table, staring at me like I was a stranger. Who are you? He asked finally. And what have you done with my mother? I couldn't help but laugh, though there was little humor in it. I'm still me, Randy. I'm just making different choices now. Because of the MS? His voice softened slightly. Mom, if this is some kind of bucket list reaction to your diagnosis, we need to talk about it. You can't blow your savings on fancy condos and whatever else you're planning. You need that money for your care. My care is taken care of, I said firmly. You don't need to worry about me. Of course I worry. You're making irrational decisions, first refusing to babysit, then turning down the assisted living tour, now this condo nonsense. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache momentarily. I think we need to talk to your neurologist. Cognitive changes can be part of MS progression. Maybe your judgment is being affected. The suggestion that I must be experiencing cognitive decline because I was asserting independence stung deeply. This was the unacknowledged truth of my relationship with my children. They only saw me as competent when I was serving their needs. Any deviation from my role as the ever-available, ever-sacrificing mother must indicate something was wrong with me. My neurologist says my cognitive function is excellent, I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger building inside. Me? In fact, we just had that conversation last week. Randy looked unconvinced. Then let me talk to him. I need to understand what's going on with you. No, I said simply. My medical information is private. Private? Mom, I'm your son. Yes, you are. And I love you very much. But my medical details and my financial decisions are mine to make. For a moment, he looked lost, like a child who'd been told Santa Claus wasn't real. Then his expression hardened. Fine, if you won't be reasonable, I'll talk to Crystal and Irene. Maybe together we can figure out what's really going on. After he left, I sat down at my small kitchen table, suddenly exhausted. Setting boundaries was harder than I'd expected. For decades, I'd trained my children to see me as an extension of themselves, a resource to be used rather than a person with my own needs and desires. Breaking that pattern was painful for all of us, but I couldn't go back now. Not when I finally had the means to create the life I wanted. That evening, as predicted, Crystal called. Her tone was gentler than Randy's had been, but the underlying message was the same. Mom, Randy told me about the condo, she began. I'm worried about you. This seems like a really impulsive decision, and with your condition... It's not impulsive, I assured her. I've thought it through carefully. But the money, Mom, how can you possibly afford it? And what about long-term care costs? MS is expensive to manage. I have a plan, Crystal. I've worked with financial advisors and healthcare specialists to make sure I'm covered. There was a pause then. What financial advisors? You've always just used Randy. I've branched out, I said simply. Mom, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, if someone's promised you returns that seem too good to be true, they probably are. There are so many scams targeting seniors these days. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children, who had been extracting free childcare, loans, and emotional labor from me for years, were concerned I was being scammed by others. Thank you for your concern, I said. But I'm being very careful. Crystal wasn't ready to give up. Look, why don't you show Randy these investment statements you're talking about? Let him verify they're legitimate. No, I said again, surprised at how easy the word was becoming. My finances are private. Private? Since when do you keep secrets? From us? Mom, we're family. Yes, we are. And families should respect each other's boundaries. The conversation ended shortly after, with Crystal clearly dissatisfied, but unable to extract any more information from me. Irene was the last to reach out, predictably via text. Mom, Randy and Crystal are freaking out about you buying some expensive condo. What's going on? Also, did you think about that loan I asked about? I replied with a simple message. I'm moving next week, and I'm sorry, but I can't lend you money right now. Her response came quickly. Is this because of your MS? Are you having money problems? Because if you need help paying for meds or whatever, maybe Randy could set up one of those GoFundMe things. The suggestion that I might need crowdfunding, while she was still asking me for loans, perfectly illustrated how little my children understood my situation, or how little they wanted to understand. As moving day approached, the tension with my children escalated. Randy called twice more, each time with a new theory about what might be happening. Perhaps I'd taken out a reverse mortgage. Impossible since I didn't own my apartment. Or maybe I'd been secretly gambling. I'd never even bought lottery tickets before the fateful one. Or perhaps I was being manipulated by a new friend with ulterior motives. Crystal began dropping by unannounced, ostensibly to help me pack but clearly there to investigate. She examined my paperwork when she thought I wasn't looking, searched through my medicine cabinet under the pretense of finding aspirin, and asked increasingly probing questions about my finances. Through it all, I maintained my boundaries with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Perhaps it was the security of knowing I had options now. Or perhaps it was simply the freedom of finally prioritizing my own well-being after decades of putting everyone else first. The truth, the unacknowledged truth that none of my children seemed willing to face, was that they weren't concerned about me at all. They were concerned about what my changing circumstances meant for them. Would I still be available for free childcare? Would I still provide emergency loans? Would there be an inheritance left when I was gone? They couldn't see that I was still the same mother who had loved them unconditionally all their lives. I had simply added myself to the list of people I cared for. Moving day arrived with unexpected serenity. I'd hired professional movers, another luxury I'd never allowed myself before, who arrived promptly at 8 in the morning. I watched as they efficiently packed the few pieces of furniture I'd decided to keep, along with my books, kitchen essentials, and clothing. Most of my old life was staying behind. The worn sofa where I'd sat for countless hours helping with homework. The kitchen table marked with decades of family meals. The twin beds in the spare room where my grandchildren occasionally slept. These pieces had served their purpose, but they had no place in my new beginning. By noon, my old apartment was nearly empty. I stood in the center of the living room, taking a final look around. This space had been a good home for 5 years, not luxurious, but comfortable. Safe. It had sheltered me through Alan's death, through the early stages of my MS diagnosis, through countless family gatherings, both joyful and tense. Ms. Wilson, we're ready to head to the new place when you are, the head mover called from the doorway. I nodded, taking one last glance around before following him out. Just as I reached the hallway, I heard familiar voices approaching, Crystal and Randy, engaged in heated conversation. Can't believe she's really going through with this, Crystal was saying. Do you think she's having some kind of breakdown? I don't know, Randy replied. But we need to… Mom! They both stopped, short when they saw me standing with the movers. What are you two doing here? I asked, genuinely surprised. Crystal stepped forward. We came to help you move, of course. Her voice was unnaturally bright. We figured you'd need some assistance with the heavy lifting. As you can see, I've hired professionals. I gestured to the movers who were watching the exchange with polite disinterest. Randy frowned. Professional movers? Mom, that's so wasteful. We could have helped for free. I appreciate the thought, I said, but everything's under control. They've been very efficient. Crystal peered past me into the apartment. Where's all your furniture? Did they already take it? I'm leaving most of it behind. I've ordered new pieces for the condo. Randy's eyebrows shot up. New furniture, too? Mom, what's going on with you? This isn't like you at all. He was right, of course. The old me would have pinched pennies, would have felt guilty spending money on herself when it could be saved for the children or grandchildren. The old me would have gratefully accepted their help, even if it came with criticism or was less efficient than professionals. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I'm ready for a change, I said simply. New home, new furnishings. Crystal took my arm, her grip just a little too tight. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. This is all happening so fast. Why don't you stay with me for a few days? We can talk through this condo situation once you've had some time to really consider it. I gently removed her hand. The condo is already mine, Crystal. The paperwork is signed. I'm moving in today. But, Ms. Wilson? The mover interrupted. We need to get going to stay on schedule. Of course, I said, relieved for the interruption. I'll be right there. I turned back to my children. If you'd like to see the new place, you're welcome to come by next weekend. I should be settled in by then. Next weekend? Randy's voice rose. You're shutting us out now? I'm establishing a boundary, I corrected. I need some time to get organized in my new space. Crystal's eyes narrowed. This isn't like you at all, Mom. First refusing to watch the kids, now this mysterious condo, expensive movers, new furniture. What's really going on? Are you seeing someone? Is there a man we don't know about? The suggestion was so absurd I almost laughed. In their minds, only romantic manipulation could explain my newfound independence. No, Crystal. There's no man. I'm simply making changes that feel right for me at this stage in my life. But I really need to go. I stepped toward the elevator, where the movers were waiting. I'll call you next week about visiting. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a glimpse of their stunned faces. For perhaps the first time in their adult lives, I had directly refused their attempts to control my choices. It was my first real act of resistance, not just declining a request, but actively opposing their will with my own. The drive to my new building was quiet. I watched the familiar streets of my old neighborhood fade away, replaced by the gleaming high-rises of downtown. When we pulled up to my new building, the doorman immediately came out to assist us. Good afternoon, Ms. Wilson, he said with a warm smile. We've been expecting you. The service elevator is ready for your movers. I stepped into the lobby with its marble floors, elegant lighting, and fresh flower arrangements. The concierge approached, offering me a welcome package. Your unit has been prepared according to your specifications, she said. The smart home system is activated, the kitchen has been stocked with your requested items, and the custom furniture that arrived yesterday has been arranged. Is there anything else you need? I blinked, momentarily overwhelmed by the attentive service. For decades, I had been the one anticipating others' needs, stocking pantries, arranging furniture, ensuring comfort. Being on the receiving end of such consideration felt foreign but wonderful. No, thank you. This is perfect. The elevator ride to the top floor was smooth and swift. When the doors opened directly into my new home, I gasped. The photographs hadn't done it justice. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic view of the city and river. The afternoon sunlight streamed across polished hardwood floors and gleamed on quartz countertops. Everything was spacious, open, designed for both beauty and accessibility. The four movers efficiently brought in my belongings, placing boxes in the appropriate rooms according to their labels. Within 2 hours, they were gone, and I was alone in my new home. I walked slowly through each room, trailing my fingers along surfaces, testing the comfort of chairs and sofas, opening and closing drawers that glided silently on hidden tracks. The master bathroom with its walk-in shower, heated floors, and built-in safety features made me tear up. Someone had designed this space thinking of people like me with physical challenges but no desire to sacrifice elegance. The second bedroom had been set up as my library, with custom bookshelves and a comfortable reading chair positioned to take advantage of the natural light. The third bedroom contained a state-of-the-art home office with an ergonomic desk that could be adjusted to standing height if sitting became too painful. As evening fell, I ordered dinner from the building's restaurant, another luxury I'd never imagined for myself. It arrived on real china, delivered by a courteous staff member who set it up on my dining table with a fresh flower and a glass of wine. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching the city lights emerge as darkness fell. My phone had been buzzing throughout the afternoon, calls and texts from Randy and Crystal that I'd ignored. Finally, I picked it up to read their messages. Randy: Mom, this has gone far enough. We need to talk ASAP about what's really going on with you. Crystal: I called your doctor. He wouldn't tell me anything because of privacy laws. What are you hiding from us? Irene: Everyone's freaking out about you. Are you having some kind of crisis? Also, is that a no on the loan? I set the phone down without responding. Their panic wasn't my emergency, for the first time in my adult life. I was prioritizing my own well-being, and their discomfort with that reality was not something I needed to manage. Sitting on my new balcony as the stars appeared above the city skyline, I reflected on the day's events. My first real act of resistance had been surprisingly empowering. I had stood my ground, maintained my boundaries, and moved forward with my plans despite their objections. Tomorrow, I would unpack my books, arrange my clothes in the spacious closets, and begin settling into my new life. In 2 weeks, I would board a plane to Venice, where a luxury hotel room overlooked the Grand Canal awaited me. And sometime soon, though I hadn't yet decided when, I would tell my children the full truth about my changed circumstances, but not until I was ready. Not until I had grown fully comfortable in my new power. My first week in the new condo passed peacefully. I established routines that prioritized my well-being, gentle morning stretches recommended by my physical therapist, breakfast on the balcony overlooking the city, afternoons reading in my library or exploring the building's amenities. I scheduled regular massages to help with muscle stiffness, a luxury I'd never before allowed myself. I also met some of my neighbors. Unlike my previous building's residents, mostly young families and working professionals who barely nodded. In passing, my new neighbors were an interesting mix. Many were retirees who, like me, appreciated the building's combination of luxury and accessibility. Others were successful professionals who valued the downtown location and concierge services. Ontau. My 5th day, I met Amelia in the building's rooftop garden. She was tending to herbs in one of the community planters, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place her. Those basil plants look happy, I commented as I settled onto a nearby bench. She looked up with a smile. They should be. I talk to them every day. Her eyes crinkled warmly. You must be the new resident in 1402. I'm Amelia Drake, 1204. We fell into easy conversation. Amelia, I learned, was 72, a retired literature professor who had taught at the city university for 40 years. She'd moved into the building 3 years ago after her husband died. Howard and I always said we'd travel after retirement, she said, pinching dead leaves from her plants. We had such plans. A literary tour of England, a culinary adventure in France, following Hemingway's footsteps through Spain. Did you get to do any of it? I asked. Her smile turned sad. No. Howard had a stroke 2 months after his retirement party. He spent 5 years in decline before passing. She straightened, brushing soil from her hands. But that's not the end of my story. After an appropriate period of grief, I decided to live for both of us. As we continued talking, I discovered Amelia had indeed fulfilled those travel dreams. Solo. She'd visited 20 countries in the past 3 years, keeping a detailed journal and photography blog that had gained a modest following. I leave. Again next week, she said. A small ship cruise through the Greek islands, literature-themed with lectures and readings at historical sites. That sounds wonderful, I replied, thinking of my own upcoming Venice trip. You should join me, she said suddenly. They always have a few open cabins. It's a lovely group, mostly retired academics and book lovers. Very low-key, perfect for those of us with physical considerations. She gestured subtly to the cane, resting against my bench. I was momentarily speechless. In my old life, an invitation like this would have been immediately dismissed. I would have cited obligations to family, budget constraints, responsibilities at home. Even if I'd been tempted, I would have suppressed the desire in favor of practicality. I'm actually headed to Venice soon, I heard myself saying. My first real trip abroad. Amelia's face lit up. Venice! How marvelous! Howard and I spent our honeymoon there. She reached into her gardening bag and pulled out a small notebook. Here, let me give you the name of a wonderful little restaurant near the Accademia. It's not in the tourist guides, but the seafood risotto is divine. As she wrote, I studied her, confident, vibrant, curious about the world, despite her age, and widowhood. She'd faced loss and embraced life anyway. She traveled with physical limitations without letting them define her experiences. She had become the protagonist of her own story rather than a supporting character in someone else's. Amelia represented everything I was just beginning to believe possible for myself. She was the contrasting element to my decades of self-denial. Have you always been so adventurous? I asked as she handed me the note. She laughed. Heavens, no. I was the cautious one in our marriage. Howard was always pushing me to take risks, try new things. I was too busy being sensible, saving for retirement, advancing my career, making sure we had security. Her expression softened. After he died, I realized security isn't everything. Now I ask myself what Howard would want me to do, and the answer is always, live fully. We talked until sunset, exchanging phone numbers before parting. I returned to my apartment feeling lighter somehow, inspired by this woman who had reimagined her life after loss. The next morning, my peaceful routine was disrupted by an unannounced visit. The concierge called to inform me that my daughter, Crystal, and her children were in the lobby, requesting to come up. For a moment, I considered refusing. My boundary about waiting until the weekend had been clear. But I missed my grandchildren, and perhaps seeing the condo would help Crystal understand my decisions better. Please send them up, I told the concierge. Minutes later, my doorbell chimed. Emily and Susan rushed in first, eyes wide as they took in the spacious interior and floor-to-ceiling windows. Wow, Nana, you live in a castle now, Susan exclaimed, running toward the windows to press her nose against the glass. Crystal followed more slowly, her expression a mix of shock and something that looked almost like envy. She scanned the custom furniture, the top-of-the-line appliances, the tasteful artwork that had been selected by the designer who'd helped furnish the space. This is not what I expected, she said finally. What did you expect? I asked, genuinely curious. She gestured vaguely. I don't know. Something sensible, practical, 1 bedroom, maybe 2. Not this. She turned in a slow circle. Mom, this place must have cost a fortune. And all this furniture looks brand new. It is, I confirmed. Would you like some tea? The view from the balcony is lovely this time of morning. Crystal followed me to the kitchen, watching as I operated the sleek espresso machine that had been delivered yesterday. Since when do you drink espresso? She asked. Since I decided to try new things, I replied, steaming milk for the children's hot chocolates. While the girls explored the apartment under my supervision, Crystal continued her subtle interrogation. Where had the money come from? Who had helped me find this place? Why hadn't I consulted them before making such a major purchase? I answered vaguely, maintaining the privacy I'd established around my finances. Finally, Crystal's frustration boiled over. "Mom, this isn't you," she exclaimed. The expensive condo, fancy coffee machines, designer furniture. You've always been practical, frugal. You clipped coupons and bought store brands. You wore the same winter coat for 15 years because it still had wear in it. What happened? To that person? I considered her question carefully. What had happened to that person? The woman who denied herself small pleasures to save for her children's futures. The woman who wore outdated clothes so her grandchildren could have new ones? The woman whose own dreams had been set aside for so long she'd almost forgotten them? She got sick, I said simply, and realized life is too short for self-denial. Crystal's face softened slightly. Is that what this is about? The MS? Mom, I understand wanting to enjoy life while you can, but this seems extreme. You're spending money like it's unlimited. I thought of Amelia, traveling the world after her husband's death, living fully despite, or perhaps because of, her awareness of life's fragility. I'm making choices that bring me joy, I said, for perhaps the first time in my adult life. Crystal started to respond, but Emily came running in from the library. Nana, you have so many books and the comfiest chair ever. Can I read in there? Of course, sweetheart. That's what libraries are for. Susan appeared next, breathless with excitement. Nana, your bathroom has a TV in the mirror, and the floor is warm. Crystal's expression tightened as she watched her daughter's enthusiasm. Girls, don't get too attached. Nana's just settling in. This might not be her forever home. The implication was clear. She still believed this was a phase, a temporary madness that would pass once I came to my senses. Actually, I said, loud enough for all to hear, I am quite attached to my new home. I plan to be here for a long time. As Crystal processed this statement, her phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked up with renewed determination. Randy and Irene are downstairs. The concierge is sending them up. So that was their plan. Arrive separately, but converge for a family intervention. I smiled, feeling strangely calm. Let them come. Let them see what I had created for myself. Let them witness the contrast between the mother they thought they knew and the woman I was becoming. The doorbell chimed again, and I took a deep breath before answering. Randy stood there, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, as if he'd rushed over from work. Behind him, Irene hung back, looking uncomfortable and out of place in her casual attire compared to the building's elegant surroundings. Mom, Randy said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes widened as he took in the space. What the hell? Irene followed, her gaze darting around the condo with undisguised curiosity and something else. Calculation. Whoa, she breathed. This place is insane. I closed the door behind them and led them to the living area where Crystal and the girls were already seated. Emily was engrossed in a book she'd borrowed from my library, while Susan was playing with the tablet I'd purchased specifically for my grandchildren's visits. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the remaining seats. Can I get anyone something to drink? Water, tea, coffee? Randy ignored my offer. Mom, what is going on? How are you affording this place? It's got to be worth at least $1.8 million, Irene cut in, looking up from her phone. I just checked the recent sales in this building. Units like this were going for around that last month. She gave me an appraising look. Unless you got a really good deal, the price is irrelevant, I said calmly. What matters is that I'm happy here. Crystal made a strangled sound. Irrelevant? Mom, We're talking about nearly $2 million, plus all this furniture and whatever else you've bought. Where did this money come from? I settled into my favorite chair, the one positioned to take advantage of both the view and the natural light for reading. I've made some changes to my financial arrangements. Randy leaned forward, his financial advisor persona taking over. What kinds of changes? Did you cash out your retirement accounts? Take out a loan? Mom, if you've done something drastic, we need to know. The penalties alone could be devastating, not to mention the tax implications. My finances are in order, I assured him. I've worked with professionals to make sure everything is handled properly. What professionals? Randy demanded. Who are these people? How did you even find them? I thought of Douglas, the attorney who had helped me claim my lottery winnings and establish the trust, of the financial team he'd connected me with, who had created a comprehensive investment strategy to ensure my money would last my lifetime with plenty left over, of the healthcare specialists who had helped me arrange for top-tier medical coverage and in-home assistance if my condition worsened. They came highly recommended, I said simply. Irene, who had been suspiciously quiet, suddenly spoke up. Mom, are you dying? Is that what this is about? Did the doctors give you bad news about your MS and now you're just like YOLOing with whatever money you can get your hands on? The question hung in the air, blunt and tactless in typical Irene fashion, yet cutting straight to what the others had been dancing around. No, Irene. My prognosis is actually quite good with proper management. This isn't about dying. It's about living. Crystal made an impatient gesture. Fine. You're living your best life or whatever, but you still haven't explained where all this money came from. Mom, we're worried about you. People don't suddenly have millions of dollars to spend on luxury. Condos without explanation. Unless… Randy's eyes narrowed. Mom, did you win the lottery or something? The room went silent. Even the children looked up, sensing the sudden tension. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I was surprised by Randy's accurate guess. Had I been too obvious? Too careless? After a moment, I laughed lightly. That would be convenient, wouldn't it? Randy studied my face for a moment, then shook his head. No, that's ridiculous. The odds are astronomical, and anyway, you never even buy tickets. Exactly, I agreed, relieved he'd talked himself out of the correct answer. Then what is it? Crystal pressed. A settlement. An inheritance from some relative we don't know about? Did you sell something valuable? I sighed, weary of the interrogation. Does it really matter where the money came from? What matters is that I'm taking care of myself. For once? Of course it matters, Randy exclaimed. Mom, we're responsible for you. We need to know what's going on so we can help you make good decisions. And there it was. The fundamental disconnect that had been growing between us for months. My children still saw themselves as the adults, the decision-makers, the ones in charge. They still saw me as someone who needed guidance and supervision, despite the fact that I had raised them, supported them, and managed a household for decades without their input. You are not responsible for me, I said quietly but firmly. I am a grown woman who has been taking care of herself and others for over 40 years. I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. The words hung in the air, simple but revolutionary. For decades I had allowed them, encouraged them even, to see me as an extension of themselves. Someone whose purpose was to serve their needs, whose identity was defined by what I could give them. I had been mother, grandmother, support system, not an individual with my own desires and autonomy. That dynamic had suited us all, in its way. They received endless support and care. I received purpose and the comfort of being needed. But my MS diagnosis had revealed the fragility of that arrangement. When I could no longer give as freely, they had no framework for seeing me as a person with needs of my own. Randy was the first to recover, Mom, we know you're capable. That's not what this is about. We're just concerned because this behavior is so out of character for you. Is it? I asked, genuinely curious. Or have I simply never had the opportunity to show you this side of myself? The question seemed to stun him. He blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. Crystal jumped in. Mom, you've always been practical and selfless, always putting everyone else first, and suddenly you're buying million-dollar condos and fancy furniture? Yes, that's out of character. Perhaps, I conceded, I've been the mother you needed me to be for so long that you've forgotten I'm also a person in my own right. The room fell silent again. Emily, sensing the heaviness in the air, closed her book and moved to sit beside me on the arm of my chair. She leaned against me, a small, warm presence offering comfort in the way children often do, instinctively, without agenda. I wrapped an arm around her, drawing strength from her unconditional affection. Looking at my 3 adult children, Randy, with his barely concealed frustration, Crystal with her mixture of concern and judgment, Irene with her calculating assessment of potential benefit to herself, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I loved them. Of course I did, with the fierce, unconditional love of a mother. I had sacrificed and given and supported them without hesitation for decades. I had shaped my entire existence around their needs and wants. I had been the sun they orbited around, constant and reliable. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. I had become so accustomed to putting my own desires last that I'd almost forgotten I had any. I had trained them to see me as a resource rather than a person, and now we were all struggling with the consequences of that lesson. The realization settled over me, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I couldn't blame them entirely for their behavior. I had participated in creating this dynamic, but I could change it now. I could love them deeply while still honoring myself. I think, I said finally, that we all need to adjust to a new reality. I'm not the same person I was before my diagnosis. I can't be. And I don't want to be. I looked each of them in the eye, seeing them not as the entitled adults who had taken me for granted, but as the children I had raised, complex, flawed, but capable of growth. I will always be your mother. I will always love you. But from now on, I will also be true to myself, my needs, my desires, my well-being. These things matter. They have to matter to me, even if they don't matter to anyone else. The truth of those words resonated through me. For too long, I had measured my worth by what I gave to others. Now I understood that I was inherently valuable, not because of what I did for my family, but simply because I existed. It was perhaps the most profound emotional realization of my life. My children's reactions to my declaration varied predictably. Randy looked shocked, as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Crystal's expression hardened into something resembling her father's disapproving frown. Irene simply looked baffled, as if the concept of her mother having needs was entirely alien. Mom, Randy began carefully, I understand you're going through a lot with the MS diagnosis. It's natural to reevaluate things when facing a health crisis. But these extreme changes, they're not extreme. I interrupted gently. Buying a comfortable home that accommodates my condition isn't extreme. Traveling while I'm still able isn't extreme. Making my own financial decisions isn't extreme. But the secrecy is, Crystal exclaimed. Why won't you just tell us where this money came from? What are you hiding? Before I could respond, the doorbell chimed again. I wasn't expecting anyone else, and for a moment, I wondered if Randy and Crystal had enlisted reinforcements for their intervention, perhaps a financial advisor or even a therapist to evaluate my mental state. I excused myself and went to answer. The door. When I opened it, Amelia stood there, elegant in a simple linen dress, a small gift bag in her hand. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said with a warm smile. I was just heading out to meet some friends for lunch and wanted to drop off a little housewarming gift. That's very kind, I replied, genuinely touched. Please, come in for a moment. I have family visiting. Amelia followed me into the living room, where my children were huddled in conversation that abruptly ceased when we entered. They all turned to stare at my new neighbor with undisguised curiosity. Everyone, this is Amelia Drake, my neighbor from downstairs. Amelia, these are my children, Randy, Crystal, and Irene, and my granddaughters Emily and Susan. Amelia greeted. Everyone graciously then handed me the gift bag. Just a small welcome to the building. It's wonderful to have a new neighbor who appreciates literature as much as I do. I peeked inside the bag and found a beautiful leather-bound journal and a novel I'd mentioned wanting to read during our conversation in the garden. Thank you, Amelia. This is perfect. I gestured to the couch. Can I get you some tea or coffee before you go? No, thank you. I really can't stay. She glanced around the room, clearly sensing the tension. I didn't mean to interrupt a family gathering. You're not interrupting at all, I assured her. In fact, your timing is excellent. I was just telling my children about my plans to travel. Amelia's face lit up. Ah, yes, Venice. Have you finalized your itinerary? I have some recommendations beyond that restaurant I mentioned. I'd love to hear them. Maybe we could have coffee tomorrow and you could share your insights? Absolutely. And do think about that Greek Islands cruise. There's still time to book if you're interested. Randy cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, but Mom hasn't mentioned any cruises to us. Amelia turned to him with a gracious smile. Oh, I just invited her yesterday. It's a literature-themed cruise through the Greek islands. Small ship, lovely accommodations, expert lectures at historical sites. Perfect for those of us who prefer a more intellectual vacation experience. Crystal's eyebrows shot up. Mom's going to Venice and considering a cruise to Greece? Since when do you travel internationally? Since now, I said simply. Amelia looked between us, clearly realizing she'd stepped into a complicated family dynamic. With the social grace of a seasoned academic, she smoothly extricated herself. I should be on my way. Those restaurant reservations won't wait, even for emeritus professors. She turned to me. Coffee tomorrow? Say 11 in the rooftop garden? Perfect, I agreed, walking her to the door. As she left, she squeezed my hand and murmured, Courage, my dear. Family transitions are never easy. When I returned to the living room, my children were exchanging significant looks. Who exactly is that woman? Randy asked. And how long have you known her? I met Amelia in the garden a few days ago. She's a retired literature professor who lived an ordinary, responsible life until her husband died. Now she travels the world and pursues her passions. And she's encouraging you to do the same, Crystal said flatly, to spend money recklessly on luxury cruises. I sighed. There's nothing reckless about a well-planned trip that I can comfortably afford. But that's just it, Mom, Randy insisted. You can't afford these things, not on your retirement savings and Social Security. Little Susan, who had been quietly playing with her tablet, suddenly looked up. But Nana's rich now. That's why we have to be extra nice to her. The room went deadly silent. All eyes turned to the 7-year-old, who suddenly seemed to realize she'd said something wrong. She glanced nervously at her mother, then back at me. Susan, Crystal said in a carefully controlled voice. What do you mean by that? Susan shifted uncomfortably. I heard you and Daddy talking. You said Nana must have come into money and that's why she's acting different. You said we need to stay on her good side so she doesn't write us out of her will. The blood drained from Crystal's face. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Susan, that's not exactly what I— Is that true? I asked quietly, looking at my daughter. Is that what you and Tom discussed? Crystal had the grace to look ashamed. Mom, it wasn't like that. We were just trying to make sense of all these sudden changes. The condo, the furniture, the travel plans. It's like you've become a different person overnight. And your conclusion was that I've come into money, and your concern is how it might affect your inheritance. "That's not fair," Randy interjected. "We're worried about you. These erratic decisions, the secrecy about your finances, it's concerning." "Concerning for me or concerning for you?" I asked. "For you, of course," Crystal insisted. "Mom, we love you. We want to make sure you're okay." I looked at my children, really looked at them. Randy in his expensive suit, constantly checking his watch. Crystal in her designer dress, dividing her attention between her children and her phone. Irene, the only one who hadn't jumped to defend their motivations, examining my artwork with an appraiser's eye. I thought about Susan's innocent revelation. I thought about all the times they'd called me recently, not to check on my health or offer support, but to question my decisions, to assert control, to protect what they saw as their future interests. Amelia's unexpected visit had been a catalyst, illuminating the contrast between her genuine warmth and my children's transparent concern for their own interests. Her arrival had created a momentary break in the tension, allowing me to see the situation with fresh clarity. And Susan's inadvertent honesty had revealed the truth behind my children's sudden intense interest in my finances. "I think," I said, carefully, "that we need some time apart. I have a lot to process, and clearly so do all of you." "Mom, please," Crystal began, but I held up a hand. "I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed and tired." I moved toward the door, opening it in a clear dismissal. "I'll be in touch when I'm ready to talk again." Randy stood his ground. "Mom, we're not leaving until we get some straight answers about where this money came from." I felt a surge of strength, drawn partly from the hurt of Susan's revelation and partly from Amelia's example of living authentically despite others' expectations. "Yes, you are leaving. This is my home, and I'm asking you to go. If you refuse, I'll call security." The shock on their faces might have been comical in another context. The idea that their mother, the woman who had never denied them anything, who had always put their needs first, would have them removed from her presence was clearly inconceivable. "You wouldn't," Crystal whispered. "I would," I confirmed quietly. "Not because I don't love you, but because I finally love myself enough to set boundaries." Slowly, reluctantly, they gathered their things. Randy was tight-lipped with suppressed anger. Crystal looked close to tears. Irene, surprisingly, was the only one who seemed to consider my position, giving me a thoughtful look as she passed. "For what it's worth," she murmured, "I think you seem happier than I've ever seen you. It's weird, but kind of cool." The children were harder. Emily hugged me tightly, confused by the adult tension but instinctively offering comfort. Susan approached cautiously, clearly worried she had caused trouble. I knelt down to her level, despite the protest from my knees. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups need to hear the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." After they left, I stood in the sudden silence of my beautiful new home, feeling an unexpected lightness. The conversation had been painful, yes, but also necessary. Amelia's appearance had been the external catalyst I needed, a living example of how life could be lived on one's own terms, regardless of age or circumstance. The morning after my family's unexpected visit, I woke to a flood of text messages and missed calls. I scrolled through them briefly, variations on demands for explanation, apologies, and thinly veiled attempts to regain access to my life. I set my phone aside without responding. They needed to understand that my boundaries were real, not negotiable tactics. Instead, I focused on preparing for my coffee meeting with Amelia. I felt lighter somehow, as if the confrontation with my children had released a burden I'd been carrying for decades. I no longer needed to pretend that our relationship was something it wasn't. I could love them without being defined by their needs and expectations. The rooftop garden was peaceful in the late morning sunshine. Amelia was already there when I arrived, seated at a small table with a French press coffee pot and 2 cups. "I took the liberty of brewing for us," she said with a smile. It's a special Sumatran blend I discovered during my travels. Thank you, I replied, settling across from her. And thank you for yesterday. Your timing was providential. She poured coffee for both of us, adding a splash of cream to hers. Family dynamics are always complicated. I couldn't help but notice the tension when I arrived. My children are struggling to accept that I'm changing, I explained. They've always seen me in a certain light, practical, frugal, self-sacrificing, the mother who exists solely to support their needs. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. And now, you're prioritizing your own needs and desires. That's threatening to them because it disrupts the established order. Exactly. Especially since it involves financial resources they apparently had plans for. Ah, Amelia sipped her coffee. The inheritance question. That's a tale as old as time. We talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing stories of our lives, our marriages, our children. Amelia had 2 sons, both successful academics who lived abroad and visited rarely. We're cordial when we see each other, she explained, but not particularly close. Howard was always the one who maintained those relationships. After he died, the boys called dutifully for a while. Then the calls became less frequent. Now it's birthday cards and occasional video chats. Does that make you sad? I asked. She considered the question. Sometimes. But I've built a rich life filled with friends, travel, learning, and new experiences. I miss having family, but I refuse to be lonely just because my sons are distant. Her philosophy resonated deeply with me. For too long, I'd equated family, connections with personal worth. I'd believed that being a good mother meant being constantly available, endlessly giving. Amelia modeled a different approach, loving her children while living a fulfilling life independent of their approval or attention. We were discussing the potential Greek Islands cruise when my phone began buzzing persistently. I glanced at it, intending to silence it when I saw the building concierge's number. "Excuse me," I said to Amelia, answering the call. "Hello? Ms. Wilson, I apologize for disturbing you," the concierge said. "But your son is in the lobby insisting on seeing you. He says it's an emergency regarding your medical care. I explained our policy about announcing visitors, but he's quite adamant." I sighed. Of course Randy would use my health as leverage to gain access. "I understand. Please tell him I'll be down shortly." After ending the call, I explained the situation to Amelia. "It seems my son is claiming a medical emergency to get past security." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's rather manipulative." "Yes, it is." I stood, gathering my things. "I'm sorry to cut our conversation short." "Not at all," she said warmly. "Shall we plan for dinner later this week? I have some travel books on Venice you might enjoy." I agreed gratefully, then headed to the elevator. As I descended to the lobby, I considered how to handle Randy's intrusion. The old me would have capitulated immediately, accepting his behavior to keep the peace. The new me recognized the manipulation for what it was and refused to reward it. When the elevator doors opened, I saw Randy pacing the lobby, phone pressed to his ear. He looked up, spotted me, and ended his call abruptly. "Mom," he said, striding toward me. "Finally. Why haven't you been answering your phone?" "Because I told you I needed space," I replied calmly. "And claiming a medical emergency to get the concierge to contact me is inappropriate, Randy." He had the grace to look slightly abashed, but quickly rallied. "I was worried about you. After yesterday, we all were. And then when you didn't answer any calls or texts. I'm a grown woman taking some time to myself, not a missing child." "What do you want, Randy?" His expression shifted, becoming more businesslike. "We need to talk about your financial situation. I've been doing some digging and the numbers don't add up. There's no way you could afford this lifestyle on your known assets." "You've been doing some digging?" I repeated, incredulous. "Into my private financial affairs?" "I'm a financial advisor, Mom. It's what I do." And something isn't right here. He lowered his voice, leaning closer. Are you being manipulated by someone? Has someone convinced you to invest in something questionable? Because if so, we might still be able to recover your funds. I stared at my son. This man who had inserted himself into my financial life years ago and now believed he had the right to investigate my affairs without permission. Who assumed that any financial decision I made without his guidance must be the result of manipulation or fraud. Randy, I said quietly, I need you to listen carefully. My finances are none of your business, not anymore. I have competent, licensed professionals managing my money. I neither need nor want your involvement. His face flushed with anger. So, that's it? After everything I've done to keep your finances in order all these years, you're just shutting me out? Trusting some strangers over your own son? That's exactly what I'm doing, I confirmed. Because those strangers treat me with respect. They value my autonomy. They see me as a competent adult making my own decisions. This is insane, he muttered. You've completely changed. The MS must be affecting your judgment more than the doctors realized. And there it was, the final straw. The moment when my own son, unable to accept that I had simply chosen independence, attributed my decisions to cognitive decline. It was the ultimate dismissal, the complete erasure of my agency. Mr. Wilson, the concierge called from her desk, I've received a complaint about raised voices in the lobby. I need to ask you to lower your tone or continue this conversation elsewhere. Randy ignored her, focusing intently on me. Mom, I'm trying to protect you. If someone's taking advantage of you, the only person trying to take advantage of me is you, I said firmly. You've been managing my modest investments for years, taking your advisory fee despite the fact that I'm your mother. You've been counting on inheriting those assets, planning how to use them, and now that I'm making my own decisions, you're questioning my mental capacity. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not true. I've always had your best interests at heart. No, Randy. You've had your interests at heart, which occasionally aligned with mine. I turned to the concierge. Margaret, I'm adding my son to the list of people who need explicit permission from me before being allowed upstairs. And I'm going out for a while. Randy's expression shifted from shock to anger. You're making a huge mistake. When you realize it, don't expect me to bail you out. I met his gaze steadily. I won't need bailing out, but thank you for making this decision easier. I walked past him, out the front doors where the doorman immediately hailed a cab for me. As I settled into the back seat, I gave the driver an address I'd looked up earlier that morning, the office of Douglas Parker, my attorney. During the ride, my phone continued buzzing with messages from Randy, now Crystal too. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the streets passing by, the people walking along the sidewalks, the sky above the city. For the first time in my adult life, I was placing firm boundaries between myself and my children. It hurt, yes, but it also felt necessary, like setting a broken bone so it could heal properly. Douglas welcomed me into his office with his usual calm professionalism. Ms. Wilson, this is an unexpected pleasure. What can I do for you today? I sat across from him, hands folded in my lap. I need to make some changes to my estate planning, and I'd like to discuss the timing of revealing my lottery win to my family. He nodded, reaching for a legal pad. I've been expecting this conversation. Tell me what you have in mind. I'm thinking it's time for them to know the truth, I said, but on my terms, and with certain conditions in place to protect both my assets and my autonomy. As Douglas began taking notes, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Randy's intrusion and accusations had been painful, but they had also been clarifying. The final straw that showed me exactly who he was and who I needed to be in response. Douglas and I spent 2 hours meticulously restructuring my estate plan. We created a series of trusts for my grandchildren's education, set aside funds for my potential long-term care needs, and established a foundation to support library literacy programs, a nod to my abandoned career dreams. As for your children, Douglas said, reviewing his notes, you're proposing modest trust funds that would provide quarterly income rather than lump sums, correct? Yes, I confirmed. Enough to improve their lives, but not enough to create dependency or entitlement. He nodded approvingly. And you want to reveal your lottery win through a formal meeting at my office? I think that's best. A neutral setting with professional guidance might help contain the emotional reactions. By the time I left Douglas's office, I felt lighter. The plan we'd developed balanced generosity with boundaries, love with pragmatism. Most importantly, it protected my autonomy while still providing for my family. I decided to walk for a while, enjoying the crisp autumn air and my newfound sense of direction. My phone had finally stopped its incessant buzzing. Perhaps Randy and Crystal had realized their tactics weren't working. When I returned to my building, Margaret the concierge informed me that my daughter Crystal had attempted to visit but had been turned away per my instructions. She'd left an envelope for me, which Margaret handed over. In the privacy of my condo, I opened it to find a handwritten note on Crystal's personal stationery. Mom, I'm sorry for how things unfolded yesterday. Susan should never have repeated what she heard Tom and me discussing. It was taken completely out of context. We're all just worried about you. These dramatic changes in your lifestyle, your sudden secrecy about money, pushing your family away, it's not like you at all. If the MS is affecting your thinking, or if you're depressed about your diagnosis, we can get you help. Please call me. The girls miss you terribly. They don't understand why their grandmother suddenly doesn't want to see them. Love, Crystal. Emotional manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Crystal was using my grandchildren as leverage, implying I was rejecting them when I'd done nothing of the sort. She was suggesting cognitive decline or depression rather than acknowledging my right to make independent choices. And she was reframing her own financial interest as concern for my well-being. In the past, this letter would have worked perfectly. I would have immediately called, apologizing for causing worry, agreeing to whatever terms would restore family harmony. I would have sacrificed my needs to avoid being cast as the villain in their narrative. Not anymore. I sat at my beautiful new desk in the library room, took out a sheet of my own stationery, and began to write. Dear Crystal, Randy, and Irene, I've given considerable thought to our recent interactions. While I appreciate your stated concern for my well-being, I've come to recognize patterns in our relationship that need to change. For most of my adult life, I've prioritized your needs above my own. I've provided childcare, financial support, and emotional labor whenever requested, often at significant cost to my own dreams and well-being. I did this willingly, out of love, but the dynamic it created has become unhealthy for all of us. My MS diagnosis forced me to reevaluate how I spend my remaining years. I've chosen to prioritize my health, comfort, and personal fulfillment. This isn't a sign of cognitive decline or depression. It's a sign of clarity and self-respect. As for my financial situation, I have some information to share with all of you. Please meet me at the office of Douglas Parker, attorney at law, on Friday at 2 p.m. The address is enclosed. Regarding my grandchildren, I love Emily, Susan, Andre, and Douglas deeply and want to maintain my relationship with them. However, that relationship will no longer include on-demand childcare. I'm happy to arrange specific visits that accommodate my health needs and travel schedule. I hope we can establish a new, healthier dynamic based on mutual respect, rather than expectation and obligation. I will always be your mother and will always love you, but I will no longer sacrifice my own well-being to fulfill roles you've assigned to me. With love and hope for understanding, Mom, I sealed the letter in an envelope, addressed it to all 3 children, and arranged for the building's courier service to deliver it. Then I called Amelia to accept her dinner invitation and inquire further about the Greek islands cruise. If the timing worked out, I could depart directly from Venice, extending my European adventure by several weeks. As evening fell, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights emerge, sipping a glass of excellent wine I'd never have indulged in before. My MS symptoms were stable today, my mind was clear, and my heart felt unexpectedly peaceful. Tomorrow, I would begin packing for Venice. Friday would bring the confrontation with my children, but tonight was just for me. Venice exceeded every expectation. From the moment the water taxi pulled away from Marco Polo Airport and headed across the lagoon, I felt like I'd entered another world. The city rose from the water like a golden mirage, church domes and bell towers punctuating the skyline, centuries of history layered in stone and brick. My hotel, a renovated palazzo on the Grand Canal, welcomed me with old-world elegance and modern amenities. The staff had been briefed about my medical needs and treated me with discreet attentiveness, ensuring my room was easily accessible and offering assistance without making me feel helpless. That first evening, standing on my private balcony overlooking the canal, watching gondolas glide by and listening to the gentle lapping of water against ancient stones, I experienced a moment of pure unfettered joy. This was freedom, the freedom to explore, to indulge my curiosity, to experience beauty without worrying about anyone else's schedule or needs. Before leaving, I'd met with my children as planned in Douglas's office. The revelation of my lottery win had been met with stunned silence, followed by a cacophony of questions, accusations, and thinly veiled calculations. $37 million, Randy had repeated, his financial advisor brain visibly computing potential investment strategies. And you've had this money for months without telling us? How could you keep this secret? Crystal had demanded, hurt and anger competing in her expression. We're your family. Irene, characteristically direct, had asked, so how much do we get? Is there like a payment plan or something? Douglas had maintained professional control of the meeting, explaining the trusts I'd established, the foundation I'd created, and the provisions I'd made for my own care. He'd outlined the quarterly payments my children would receive, generous but not extravagant, and the educational trusts for my grandchildren. Mom, this isn't fair, Crystal had protested when she understood the structure. We should have a say in how this money is used. It's family money. No, I'd corrected gently. It's my money. I won it, I claimed it, and I'm sharing it according to my values and priorities. Randy had leaned forward, financial statements spread before him. These trusts are irrevocable. You've already locked most of the money away where we can't access it. That's correct, Douglas had confirmed. Ms. Wilson has thoughtfully provided for her family while maintaining control over her assets. They'd left unsatisfied, of course. The narrative they'd constructed, that I was being manipulated, that my judgment was compromised, that they needed to intervene for my own good, had crumbled in the face of the truth. I wasn't a vulnerable old woman being taken advantage of. I was a lottery winner making deliberate choices about my own wealth. Now, a week into my Venetian adventure, their dissatisfaction felt distant and unimportant. I'd sent postcards to my grandchildren and received delighted text messages in return. Emily had even video called with Crystal's reluctant permission, eager to hear about the gondolas and gelato. Each day brought new discoveries. I explored narrow alleyways and grand piazzas, visited museums and churches, and sampled local cuisine at restaurants recommended by Amelia and my hotel concierge. When my MS symptoms flared, bringing fatigue and muscle stiffness, I adjusted, my plans without self-recrimination. Sometimes that meant a quiet afternoon reading in a campo, watching local life unfold around me. Other times it meant hiring a private water taxi rather than navigating crowded vaporetti. I met interesting people, fellow travelers, locals, expatriates who'd fallen in love with Venice and never left. Without the constraints of family expectations, I found myself engaging in conversations I'd never have initiated before, accepting invitations I'd have automatically declined. One evening, I joined a small cooking class where an elderly Venetian woman taught us to make proper risotto in her centuries-old kitchen. Another day, I spent hours in a tiny bookshop run by an English poet who'd lived in Venice for 20 years. When he discovered my love of literature, he invited me to a reading at a local cultural center, where I met academics from universities around the world. I bought things simply because they brought me pleasure. A hand-bound leather journal from a traditional craftsman, a pair of earrings made from Murano glass, cashmere scarves in colors I'd always admired but never worn. I had my portrait painted by a street artist in Dorsoduro, laughing at his flirtatious banter, enjoying being seen as a woman rather than just a mother or grandmother. Each night, I returned to my hotel feeling pleasantly tired but deeply satisfied. I'd write in my journal, recording not just what I'd seen, but how it had made me feel. I'd never kept a journal before, had never felt my own experiences were worth documenting. Now I filled pages with observations, reflections, and small sketches of things that caught my eye. The woman emerging in those pages surprised me. She was observant, thoughtful, occasionally poetic. She noticed architectural details and light patterns, the changing moods of the canals, the rhythms of local life continuing beneath the tourist. Overlay. She had opinions about art and food and the people she encountered. She was, I realized with some astonishment, interesting. For 63 years, I'd defined myself solely through my relationships to others, daughter, wife, mother, grandmother. I'd never considered that I might be a complete person in my own right, with unique perspectives and experiences worth valuing. Venice was revealing that person to me, one canal, one campo, one conversation at a time. On my 10th day in Venice, I woke to a peculiar heaviness in my right leg. I recognized the sensation immediately, the beginning of an MS flare. Rising slowly, I found my leg dragging slightly as I made my way to the bathroom. By the time I'd showered and dressed, numbness had spread to my fingertips, and fatigue pressed down on me like a physical weight. For a moment, I felt a surge of fear and frustration. I'd planned to visit the Peggy Guggenheim collection today, followed by a private boat tour of hidden canals. Would my body's betrayal force me to abandon those plans? To retreat to my room while Venice continued its timeless dance without me? Sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, remembering my neurologist's advice. MS doesn't define you, but it does require you to listen to your body. Rest isn't failure. It's strategic recovery. I called the concierge to explain my situation. Within an hour, he had rearranged my day. The private boat tour would now include comfortable seating and minimal walking. The museum visit was postponed to another day, replaced with a leisurely lunch at a canal-side restaurant near my hotel. We've also arranged for a medical professional to be available should you need assistance, he assured me. Many of our guests manage chronic conditions while traveling. It's our pleasure to accommodate your needs. As I navigated this adjusted day, I realized I was facing the central challenge of my new life, balancing independence with the reality of my health limitations. The old me would have pushed through, ignoring symptoms until I collapsed, then berated myself for weakness. The new me was learning a different approach, acknowledging limitations without surrendering to them, adjusting expectations without abandoning joy. The boat tour proved to be a highlight of my trip. My guide, a Venetian whose family had lived in the city for generations, showed me hidden corners accessible only by water, tiny canals where laundry still hung between ancient buildings, secret gardens glimpsed through iron gates, workshops, where traditional crafts continued undisturbed by tourism. When we passed the hospital, he pointed out the water entrance where ambulance boats delivered patients. In Venice, even emergencies travel by water, he explained. It is our blessing and our challenge. Something about that phrase resonated with me. My MS was both blessing and challenge. The diagnosis had forced me to reclaim my life, yet it also imposed new limitations I couldn't ignore. That evening, as I rested in my hotel room, my phone rang. It was Amelia, checking on my Venetian adventures. "How are you finding it?" she asked. "Has it cast its spell on you yet?" "Completely," I admitted, though I had a flare-up today that forced me to change my plans. "Ah," she said, her voice warm with understanding, the body asserting its sovereignty. "I know that all too well." I was surprised. "You have health issues too? You seem so vibrant and active." She laughed softly. "My dear, I have rheumatoid arthritis. Have had it for 20 years. Some days are better than others, but I've learned to work with it rather than against it." "How?" I asked, genuinely curious. "How do you travel so extensively, do so much, while managing pain and fatigue?" "Planning, flexibility, and perspective," she said simply. "I plan carefully, remain flexible when things must change, and keep perspective about what truly matters. If I can see the Acropolis but must skip the Temple of Olympian Zeus because my joints are protesting, well, I've still seen the Acropolis." Her pragmatic approach struck me as profoundly wise. "I'm trying to learn that balance," I admitted. "Today I was disappointed about missing the Guggenheim, but the boat tour I did instead was magical in a different way." "Exactly," Amelia sounded delighted. "That's the secret, finding the magic in the adjusted plan rather than mourning the original." After we hung up, I thought about our conversation. For decades, I'd measured my worth by my ability to persist, despite discomfort, to fulfill obligations regardless of personal cost. I'd interpreted any accommodation of my own needs as weakness or selfishness. Now I was learning a different kind of strength, the wisdom to honor my body's signals, to adapt rather than endure, to find joy in the revised itinerary rather than resentment in the changed plans. The next morning, I woke feeling somewhat improved. The numbness in my fingers had receded, though my legs still felt heavier than normal. I decided to test Amelia's philosophy with an expedition to the Rialto market. I took a water taxi rather than walking. I used a discreet folding cane for stability. I sat frequently at small cafes, resting while watching the vibrant market life unfold around me. And when fatigue began to build, I didn't push through. I simply changed course, hiring a gondola to take me slowly back to my hotel through quiet side canals. It was, perhaps, not the day I would have planned before my diagnosis. There were fewer sights seen, fewer items checked off a tourist's list, but there was a depth to the experience that hurrying might have missed. Conversations with vendors about produce I didn't recognize, the perfect espresso enjoyed in a square where local children played, the meditative quality of gliding silently through narrow waterways while my gondolier pointed out architectural details I would have overlooked. That night, I wrote in my journal about this new understanding. MS had presented me with my central challenge, learning to live fully within new limitations. It wasn't just about managing symptoms. It was about reimagining what a good life looked like when perfect health was no longer part of the equation. Tuck your chew. Same challenge applied to my relationships with my children. I could love them deeply while acknowledging the boundaries necessary for my well-being. I could be generous without being exploited, supportive without being subsumed. I could find the balance that had eluded me for decades. As I drifted toward sleep, watching moonlight dance on the canal waters outside my window, I felt a curious sense of gratitude. My diagnosis, the lottery win, even my children's disappointing reactions, all had conspired to bring me to this place of greater wisdom and authenticity. The central challenge of my life now was clear: to live each day with intention, balancing aspiration with limitation, independence with connection, generosity with boundaries. It was a challenge I was finally equipped to meet. My 2 weeks in Venice concluded with a farewell dinner at the restaurant Amelia had recommended near the Accademia. The seafood risotto was indeed divine, as promised. I dined alone, but didn't feel lonely. Another new experience for me. The old me would have felt self-conscious, convinced that other diners were pitying the solitary older woman. The new me simply enjoyed the excellent food, the attentive service, and the pleasure of my own thoughts. From Venice, I traveled directly to Athens to join Emilia's literature-themed cruise. She met me at the port, elegant as always in a flowing linen outfit and a wide-brimmed hat. "You made it," she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "I wasn't entirely sure you'd come." "Neither was I admitted with a laugh. "I've never done anything like this before." "Then you're in for a treat. The ship is small, just 80 passengers, and the itinerary is perfect. We'll visit islands that the big cruise ships can't access, with local guides who know the literary and historical significance of each site." The cruise exceeded my expectations. The ship was indeed intimate, more like a private yacht than a traditional cruise vessel. My cabin was accessible and comfortable, with a private balcony overlooking the sea. The ship had medical staff available around the clock, which reassured me given my condition. Through Emilia, I quickly became part of a small group of like-minded travelers, a retired history professor from Boston, a widowed bookstore owner from Toronto, a British couple who had spent their careers in publishing. We attended lectures together, shared meals, and explored each port of call at a leisurely pace that accommodated my occasional need for rest. On Hydra, we visited the house where Leonard Cohen had lived and written many of his famous songs. No, Santorini, we had a private reading of Greek poetry on a terrace overlooking the caldera at sunset. On Delos, we walked among ancient ruins while a classical scholar brought the island's mythology to life. Throughout these experiences, I found myself opening up to my new companions in ways I never had with people back home. I shared stories about my children, my MS diagnosis, even the lottery win that had transformed my life. "It must have been quite a shock," said Margaret, the bookstore owner, as we sat on deck one evening watching the stars emerge above the Aegean, "coming into that kind of money so suddenly." "The money was surprising," I acknowledged, "but the real shock was realizing how it changed others' perception of me. Suddenly I wasn't just reliable old mom anymore. I was a resource to be managed, an inheritance to be protected." "People reveal themselves when money enters the picture," observed Harold, the history professor, "for better or worse." "In my case, mostly worse," I said with a rueful smile. But it was clarifying. I saw the dynamics of my family relationships with new eyes. These conversations continued throughout the cruise, touching on literature, philosophy, personal histories, and life transitions. Unlike the superficial socializing I'd experienced at neighborhood gatherings or family events back home, these discussions had depth and honesty. No one had preconceived notions about who I was or should be. No one needed anything from me except companionship and conversation. Emilia proved to be not just a travel companion, but a genuine friend. She understood my health challenges without pity, offered support without making me feel dependent, and shared her own vulnerabilities in return. When my MS symptoms flared during our stop in Rhodes, making it impossible for me to join a planned excursion to an ancient acropolis, she adjusted her plans without complaint, suggesting we instead visit a nearby medieval town with more accessible pathways. "Travel partners need flexibility," she said matter-of-factly. "Howard and I learned that early. Some days are for conquering mountains, others for savoring the view from the valley." By the time the cruise concluded, I had formed connections, deeper than any I'd developed in years. We exchanged contact information with promises to stay in touch, not the vague, polite exchanges often made at the end of vacations, but genuine commitments to continue our conversations. "We're kindred spirits," Margaret declared as we shared a final breakfast before disembarking in Athens. Midlife orphans finding our way without the traditional support structures. "Midlife orphans," I repeated, liking the term. "Yes, that describes it perfectly." Harold raised his coffee cup in a toast. To chosen family, then. May it sustain us as well as, or better than, the biological variety. To chosen family, we echoed, clinking our cups together. As I flew home the next day, I reflected on how profoundly my understanding of connection had shifted. For decades, I'd defined relationships solely through obligation and blood ties. I'd poured endless energy into maintaining family bonds, even when they were clearly one-sided. I'd never considered that meaningful connection could develop quickly, between strangers who shared values and life experiences. These new friendships felt different from my family relationships, more balanced, more nurturing, based on mutual respect rather than expectation. No one in our midlife orphans group would ever call me at the last minute demanding childcare. No one would question my spending or my travel plans. No one would use my health condition to manipulate me or dismiss my agency. Yet these connections weren't superficial. We had shared deeply personal stories, offered genuine emotional support, and promised ongoing presence in each other's lives. Margaret was already planning a book club that would meet monthly via video chat. Harold had invited us all to his beach house on Cape Cod for a week in the summer. Amelia and I had discussed traveling to Japan together the following spring. Realized I was building something precious and necessary, a chosen family to supplement the biological one that had disappointed me. People who saw me clearly and valued me for exactly who I was, not what I could provide. My MS diagnosis had taught me that health was uncertain. My lottery win had shown me that financial security could come from unexpected sources. Now these new friendships were revealing that emotional support and meaningful connection could develop outside traditional family structures. It was perhaps the most liberating discovery yet. I returned to my condo feeling rejuvenated and transformed. My travels had given me not just beautiful memories but a new perspective and meaningful connections. I'd learned to navigate the world with MS rather than despite it, to find joy in adjusted plans, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The sanctuary of my home welcomed me back, spacious, comfortable, arranged for both beauty and accessibility. After unpacking, I spent a peaceful evening on my balcony, watching the city lights and savoring my homecoming. Reality intruded the next morning. My phone, which had remained blissfully quiet during my travels, began buzzing with messages from my children. They'd apparently realized I was back in the country, likely from tracking my social media, where I'd posted a few carefully selected photos from my trip. Crystal's text was the first to arrive. "Mom, we need to talk about your spending. The amount you've blown through on this vacation is concerning. The kids are asking when they'll see you." Randy followed. "There are some issues with the trusts we need to discuss. My financial advisor says the structure is unnecessarily complex. I've scheduled a meeting for us tomorrow at his office." Irene was characteristically direct. "Hey, Mom, when's my next payment coming through? The quarterly thing is kind of a drag. Can we renegotiate?" I read their messages with a clarity I wouldn't have possessed before my travels. Each was approaching me through the lens of self-interest. Crystal using her children as leverage, Randy attempting to assert control over my finances, Irene seeking greater access to my money. None had asked about my trip, my health, or my well-being. Composed a single response that I sent to all three. "I'm well. Thank you for asking. My travels were wonderful and my MS is stable. I'm not available for financial discussions or meetings at this time. The trust arrangements remain exactly as established. I'd love to see my grandchildren soon. Perhaps Saturday afternoon at the park near my building? I'll contact you once I've rested from my journey." Their responses came quickly, variations on dismay and increased urgency. But I held firm. My new boundaries weren't temporary or negotiable. 3 days later, Randy appeared at my building, once again attempting to gain access through the concierge by claiming a family emergency. This time I declined to come down or allow him up. Instead, I called him from my apartment. "This has to stop, Randy," I said when he answered. "False emergencies to get past security will only result in you being permanently barred from the building." "Mom, this is ridiculous," he snapped. "I'm your son. I shouldn't need an appointment to see you." "You need my consent," I corrected. "And right now, I'm not consenting to an unplanned visit. We need to talk about these trusts," he insisted. "They're unnecessarily complicated." "My advisor says—" "Your advisor has no say in how I structure my estate," I interrupted. "The trusts were established with expert legal and financial guidance. They're not open for renegotiation." The conversation devolved from there, with Randy, growing increasingly frustrated by my refusal to yield. Finally, he resorted to his ultimate weapon, attempting to undermine my confidence in my own judgment. "This isn't you, Mom," he said, his voice softening into concern. "The secrecy, the stubbornness, shutting out your family. I'm worried about cognitive changes from your MS." It was the same tactic he'd used before, but this time, strengthened by my travels and new friendships, I recognized it for what it was: manipulation, disguised as concern. "Goodbye, Randy," I said firmly. "I'll call you when I'm ready to talk again." I ended the call and blocked his number. 3 months after my return from Europe, I stood in a small gallery downtown, surrounded by my own artwork. The walls displayed a dozen watercolor paintings, scenes from Venice and the Greek islands, captured through my novice but enthusiastic brush. I'd started painting shortly after returning home, inspired by the beauty I'd witnessed on my travels. At first, it was just a way to process my experiences, to keep the memories vivid. I enrolled in a weekly watercolor class at the community center, discovering that my hands, though occasionally affected by MS symptoms, were still capable of creating beauty. My instructor, impressed by my dedication and natural eye for color and composition, had suggested I consider showing my work. I'd laughed at first. Who would want to see an amateur's paintings? But then Amelia, visiting from her latest adventure in Portugal, had seen my growing collection. "These are marvelous," she'd declared, examining each painting carefully. "You've captured something essential about these places, not just their appearance, but their feeling." With her encouragement, I'd approached a small gallery that specialized in showcasing emerging local artists. The owner, a former art therapist named Susan, had immediately responded to my work. "There's an authenticity here," she'd said, carefully, examining my Venice Canal scenes. "A mature perspective that younger artists often lack. Would you consider a small exhibition?" And so here I was, at the opening reception of New Horizons, Watercolors by Eleanor Wilson. My first ever art show at age 63. The gallery was filled with people, fellow artists from my class, neighbors from my building, new friends from the book club I'd joined. Amelia had flown in specifically for the event, and Margaret had surprised me by appearing as well, having combined the trip with a visit to a book fair. What made my heart swell most, however, was the presence of my grandchildren. Emily and Susan stood proudly beside one canvas, explaining to anyone who would listen that, "My Nana painted this. She went to Venice and saw this exact canal." Andre and Douglas were more reserved but clearly impressed, especially when they spotted the small red dots indicating sales on several of my paintings. Their parents stood at a careful distance, invited by their children rather than by me. Our relationship remained strained, the boundaries I'd established still holding firm. They'd made various attempts to re-establish the old dynamics, but I had remained resolute. Crystal approached me during a quiet moment, a glass of wine in her hand. "The paintings are beautiful, Mom," she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise. "I had no idea you were artistic." "Neither did I admitted. "It's something I'm discovering about myself." She nodded, glancing around at the gathering. "You seem to have made many new friends." "Yes," I agreed. "Life has expanded in unexpected ways." She hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been bothering her. Are you happier now, without us so present in your life? I considered her question carefully. I'm happier being true to myself, I said finally. That doesn't mean I don't love you and your siblings. It just means I've found a better balance. Before she could respond, Susan appeared at my elbow. Eleanor, the reporter from the local arts magazine would like to interview you, and we've sold 3 more paintings. As I excused myself, I caught a glimpse of Crystal's expression, a mix of confusion, respect, and perhaps a touch of envy. She was seeing a side of her mother she'd never known existed, a woman with talents and passions and an identity entirely separate from her family role. That evening, surrounded by friends new and old, celebrating an achievement that belonged entirely to me, I felt a profound sense of authenticity. This wasn't about money or status or even artistic acclaim. It was about discovering aspects of myself that had lain dormant for decades, about creating something that expressed my unique vision. For the first time in my life, I was being recognized and appreciated not as someone's mother, wife, or grandmother, but simply as myself. Eleanor Wilson, artist, traveler, woman of depth and perspective. It was, perhaps, my most meaningful achievement yet. 1 year after my MS diagnosis and lottery win, I sat in the sunlit courtyard of my new vacation home in Tuscany. The small villa, nestled among olive groves with a view of rolling hills, represented another step in my transformed life. I'd purchased it 3 months earlier as a European base for my increasingly adventurous travels. Amelia sat across from me, both of us enjoying morning coffee and the peaceful countryside. She'd become a cherished friend, visiting often and accompanying me on journeys to Spain, Morocco, and Japan. Today, we were planning our next expedition, a literature tour through England's Lake District. The walking might be challenging some days, she noted, reviewing the itinerary on her tablet. But they offer alternative transportation options, if needed. I think I can manage, I replied. My new medication regimen has been incredibly effective. The neurologist says my MS progression has stabilized. It was true. With access to the best medical care money could buy, I'd found a treatment protocol that minimized symptoms and maintained my mobility. I still had occasional flare-ups, but they were less frequent and less severe. I'd learned to work with my body's limitations rather than fight against them. My relationship with my children had evolved as well, settling into a new pattern with clearer boundaries. The quarterly trust payments continued, providing them financial support without creating dependency. I saw my grandchildren regularly, though on my terms, planned visits that accommodated my energy levels and travel schedule. Randy had finally accepted that he would not regain control of my finances. Our interactions remained somewhat formal but respectful. Crystal had undergone the most significant transformation, gradually coming to appreciate the woman I'd become rather than resenting the mother I no longer was. Irene, surprisingly, had used part of her trust funds to return to college, discovering a passion for environmental science that had been dormant for decades. My newfound artistic pursuits had blossomed beyond my initial expectations. Following my successful first exhibition, I'd continued painting, developing a distinctive style that merged realistic landscapes with emotional impression. My work now appeared in 3 galleries, and I'd been featured in a regional art magazine as an emerging senior artist to watch. Most meaningfully, I'd established a scholarship for older students returning to education, particularly those with health challenges. The first recipient, a 57-year-old woman pursuing a degree in library science while managing lupus, reminded me poignantly of the dreams I had once deferred. You know, Amelia said, interrupting my reflections, when Howard died, I thought my life was essentially over. I expected to merely exist, waiting out my remaining years. I never imagined this. She gestured to encompass the villa, our friendship, our adventures, would be possible. I nodded, understanding completely. A year ago, I was defined solely by what I gave to others. I couldn't have conceived of this life. We were interrupted by the arrival of the local postal carrier, who delivered a thick envelope bearing my lawyer's return address. Inside was a letter from Douglas and several legal documents requiring my signature. As I reviewed them, I smiled. The papers formalized the creation of a foundation dedicated to supporting accessibility in the arts and education for older adults. It would be my legacy, not just the inheritance I left my children, but a lasting contribution to causes that reflected my values. "Good news?" Amelia inquired, noting my expression. "The best kind," I replied. "I'm shaping my own future, and hopefully making a small difference for others like us." Later that afternoon, as golden light bathed the Tuscan landscape, I sat at my easel capturing the view. My phone chimed with a video call from Emily and Susan, eager to show me their school art projects inspired by my paintings. As I chatted with my granddaughters, showing them the olive groves and promising to bring them for a visit during their summer break, I felt a profound sense of contentment. The woman I had become, artist, traveler, philanthropist, autonomous being, would have been unrecognizable to the self-sacrificing mother and grandmother I'd been for decades. My MS diagnosis had not diminished my life, but expanded it. My lottery win had not corrupted me, but liberated me. My children's initial rejection had not broken me, but strengthened me. I had discovered in my 7th decade that it's never too late to become the protagonist of your own story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.